The first thing Holden Manfred noticed was the cold. Not the bone-deep freeze of cryosleep, but the ambient chill of a cargo hold running on minimal life support. His eyelids felt heavy, gummed together with crystallized moisture, and the sharp wail of emergency klaxons pierced through his consciousness like needles. Something had gone wrong. The pod wasn't supposed to wake him for another 2 years, long after the Empire's search for a deserting shock trooper would have gone cold. Through frosted glass, he could make out the blurred shapes of cargo containers and the steady pulse of emergency lighting painting everything in alternating shadows of red and black. The pod's seal broke with a hiss, releasing a cloud of cryo-vapor into the already chilly air. Holden's muscles screamed in protest as he tried to move, his enhanced physiology fighting against the effects of long-term suspension. The Empire had modified their shock troopers for faster recovery, but even those improvements couldn't completely eliminate the disorientation of cryo-revival. "Well now, this is interesting." The voice, graveled with age and touched with an accent Holden couldn't place, came from somewhere to his left. "When my sensors picked up an unauthorized power draw from Cargo Bay 3, I was expecting a malfunctioning refrigeration unit. Instead, I find a stowaway in military-grade cryogear." Holden turned his head, fighting waves of nausea, to see an older man studying him with sharp eyes set in a weathered face. The captain's insignia on his worn jacket gleamed dully in the emergency lights. "Sir, I can't explain—" Holden started, his voice cracking from disuse. "Save it for after we get some synth calf in you," the captain interrupted, reaching down to help Holden out of the pod. "Name's James Rawlins, and you're aboard my ship, the Falcon Heavy, currently docked at Redford 1, which I'm guessing wasn't your intended destination." Holden's legs buckled as he tried to stand, and Rawlins caught him with surprising strength. "Easy there, son. Cryo's rough enough without trying to be a hero about it." The journey to the captain's quarters was a blur of narrow corridors and humming machinery. Holden's enhanced senses gradually began to return, picking up the subtle vibrations of the station's massive environmental systems, the lingering scent of recycled air, and the distant sounds of commerce and life beyond the ship's hull. Rawlins' quarters were sparse but lived in, with real paper books secured behind transparent panels and a collection of oddities that spoke of decades spent in the deep black. The captain gestured Holden into a worn acceleration chair and busied himself with an ancient coffee maker that looked older than either of them. "Imperial Shock Forces, right?" Rawlins asked, his back still turned. "Saw the neural port at the base of your skull, standard issue for their elite troops these days." Holden's hand instinctively went to the interface jack. "How did you—" "Served with the 43rd Expeditionary Force before the Empire decided to start calling itself an empire," Rawlins said, turning to hand Holden a steaming cup of synthetic coffee. "Saw enough good soldiers get turned into living weapons. Saw enough of them try to run, too." The coffee was terrible, but it helped clear the last cobwebs from Holden's mind. Rawlins settled into his own chair with a grunt. "Out here? In the cloud? Empire's got no jurisdiction, and more importantly, no friends. Besides," he added with a grim smile, "I've got my own reasons for not being too fond of their particular brand of civilization." He shook his head and sank into his own chair, frowning at me. "I couldn't do it anymore," Holden said quietly, staring into his cup. "The pacification missions, the civilian casualties, the way they—" He broke off, memories of his last deployment threatening to overwhelm him. "Which is why you stowed away in my cargo hold, in a military-grade cryopod that probably cost more than some planet's GDP," Rawlins finished. "Looking to disappear." "Something like that?" Rawlins studied him for a long moment. "Well, you've certainly come to the right place. The cloud's where things go to disappear. People, too." He leaned forward. Question is, what are you planning to do now that you're here? Holden met the captain's gaze. Honestly, I hadn't thought past getting away. The captain turned to face him as his palms curled into fists, at his sides fighting. Then let me make you an offer, Rollins said. I've got a crew of 6 running a ship that should have at least 8. Could use someone with your training, especially considering some of the runs we make out here. He gestured at the viewport, where the swirling colors of the cloud painted patterns across the stars. Pays fair, work's mostly legal, and more importantly, it's about as far from the Empire as you can get without leaving the galaxy entirely. Why would you trust me? Holden asked. For all you know, I could be a spy, a murderer. Son, out here in the cloud, everyone's running from something. What matters is what you do once you stop running. Rollins stood, joints cracking. Take some time. Think it over. But don't take too long. We've got a cargo run coming up that could use an extra hand, especially one that knows how to handle himself in a fight. As if to emphasize his point, distant warning klaxons echoed through the station, followed by the sound of emergency bulkheads slamming shut. Rollins didn't even flinch. Another klax sounded, a reminder that the world around him was unsafe for the time being. Welcome to Redford 1, he said with a wry smile. Where that sort of thing is just another Tuesday. I can't be perfect, Dad, she said, patting his shoulder. Good Redford 1 hit Holden like a sensory overload grenade. After the controlled sterility of Imperial stations, the chaos was almost overwhelming. The docking ring alone was a maze of retrofitted airlocks and jury-rigged pressure seals, each connection marking where another derelict ship had been permanently grafted to the growing structure. Watch your step, Rollins warned as they passed through a particularly creative bit of engineering where the deck plates didn't quite match up. Station's got character, you might say. Is that what we're calling it? Holden's enhanced senses picked up the subtle variations in air pressure, the barely perceptible groans of metal, and at least 3 different atmospheric mixing patterns competing in the same corridor. Started growing organically for the better part of a century, Rollins said, leading them through an arch that had clearly once been the cargo door of an ancient mining vessel. Every ship that couldn't make it back out, every habitat module that drifted in, they all became part of the station. Some say she's alive now in her own way. And they emerged into what Rollins called the Grand Concourse, though there was nothing grand about it. The space was a hollow cylinder that ran the length of the station's core, its walls lined with shops, homes, and businesses built into and around the hulls of countless ships. Holographic signs competed with actual neon, their light reflecting off surfaces that had been polished by decades of passing hands. First rule of the cloud, Rollins said as they walked. Forget everything the Empire taught you about how things should work. Out here, if it works at all, it's good enough. A group of beings that Holden's Imperial training identified as Meridians, a species officially listed as extinct in Imperial records, passed by, their crystalline bodies chiming faintly. Nobody gave them a second glance. Second rule? Holden asked, trying not to stare at a shop selling what appeared to be pre-judgment Earth artifacts. Everyone's got a story, but nobody's got a past. Rollins stopped at a viewport, gesturing at the swirling colors outside. The cloud doesn't care who you were, only matters who you are now. They passed several residential sections where Holden noticed something odd. Among the occupied units with their signs of life and personality, there were others, preserved but empty, their nameplates still attached, their entry systems still active. Why haven't those been reassigned? He asked, pointing to one such unit. Rollins' expression softened. Third rule, nobody's really gone out here. Had a crew member show up last year after being missing for 15 years. Found some kind of time distortion in the deep cloud, he said. Came back thinking only a month had passed. He shrugged. So we keep their places, just in case. The tour continued through hydroponics sections where crops grew in impossible geometric patterns, past engineering zones where physics seemed more suggestion than law, and through markets where goods from 1,000 worlds changed hands, with barely a word spoken. "This is impossible," Holden muttered as they watched a trader apparently bargaining with a hologram. "The Empire's got star charts of everything within 1,000 light years. How does this place even exist?" "The cloud plays hell with navigation," Rollins explained. "Changes course headings, scrambles quantum readings. You don't find Redford 1, she finds you, when she wants to." They stopped at a small establishment that Rollins introduced as Brady's. The interior was built from what looked like the bridge of an ancient warship, its tactical displays now showing drink prices instead of weapon systems. "Evening, Captain," the bartender called out. His species was unfamiliar to Holden, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence. "Maybe," Rollins said, gesturing Holden to a seat, showing him around first. "Afraid of what?" Holden asked. "Ah, the grand tour." The bartender set 2 glasses of something phosphorescent on the bar. "Welcome to nowhere, friend." "People keep calling it that," Holden said, cautiously sniffing the drink. His enhanced senses detected nothing immediately toxic. "Nowhere. Because officially we don't exist," the bartender said cheerfully. "Can't exist, according to Imperial sciences. The cloud's just a navigation hazard on their maps, a place ships don't come back from." He gestured at the packed bar. "Funny thing about nowhere. Sure seems to have a lot of people in it." As if to emphasize his point, the station's public address system crackled to life, announcing the arrival of a ship long thought lost. Cheers erupted throughout the bar. "See," Rollins said, "another ghost coming home." Later, as they walked back to the Falcon Heavy, Holden found himself studying the endless flow of people, human and otherwise, through the station's arteries. Each face held a story. Each step carried the weight of whatever journey had brought them here. "You said you needed 8 crew," he said finally. "For the Falcon Heavy." "Exercise, exercise, exercise." Rollins nodded. "That's right. If the offer's still open?" "Mess hall's at 600, Rollins said, not breaking stride. "Don't be late. And Holden?" He turned, his expression serious. "Whatever you did for the Empire, whatever they made you do, that's not who you are anymore. Out here, you get to choose who you become." As they reached the ship, emergency klaxons sounded again, followed by the familiar sound of bulkheads sealing. This time, Holden noticed something else. Nobody panicked. Nobody even seemed concerned. In the cloud, even chaos had its own peculiar order. He was starting to understand why people called this place home. A week into his new life aboard the Falcon Heavy, Holden was beginning to find his rhythm. The ship's systems were decades behind Imperial tech, but there was an honest simplicity to them. No neural interfaces, no AI oversight, just machinery that either worked or didn't. He was deep in the maintenance shaft, rewiring a stubborn targeting system, when Rollins' voice echoed through the ship's comm. "All hands to the mess. Got a contract to discuss." The Falcon Heavy's mess hall doubled as their briefing room, its walls covered in manually updated star charts of the cloud's ever-shifting territories. The rest of the crew was already assembled when Holden arrived. Mackenzie Gilbert, their pilot, whose fingers never stopped moving as if constantly plotting courses in her mind. Scott Wade, the engineer who seemed to communicate better with machines than people. The Jiang twins, June and Lei, handling cargo and life support respectively. And Dr. Isabella Childs, whose medical bay seemed to hold more mysteries than supplies. "Right then," Rollins said, activating a holographic display at the center of the table. "Got a priority contract from New Haven Colony. They're dealing with an outbreak of Titan's fever. Got the vaccine they need, but..." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "But it's deep, Cloud," Mackenzie finished, her fingers finally going still. "Through the drift." Holden had heard whispers about the drift during his first week, a particularly treacherous region of the cloud where ships regularly disappeared. The Empire had marked it as a navigational dead zone, but like everything else about the cloud, the reality was more complicated. "Pay's exceptional," Rawlins continued, "triple our usual rate, plus priority docking privileges at New Haven for the next standard year." "There's a reason for that pay," Scott muttered, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused. "Pirates have been hitting every supply run through that sector. 3 ships lost in the last month alone." "There be pirates," June and Lay said in unison, echoing the warning Holden had heard countless times on the station. "Different class of pirates out there now," Isabella added, her dark eyes serious. "Word is they've got advanced tech. Some say they've found alien weaponry in the deep cloud. Others think they've got rogue AIs running tacticals." "All the more reason for us to take the job," Rawlins said. "New Haven's got 5,000 colonists. Without this vaccine, they're looking at a 30% mortality rate." Holden studied the projected route, his military training automatically identifying choke points and potential ambush locations. "The drift scrambles long-range sensors, right? Makes it perfect for hit-and-run attacks." "That's where you come in," Rawlins nodded. "Need your combat experience to upgrade our defensive protocols. Mackenzie's the best pilot in the cloud, but even she can't outrun everything." The pilot grinned. "Watch me try, though." "Wah." As the crew discussed logistics, Holden found himself drawn to the swirling patterns in the holographic representation of the drift. There was something almost familiar about its movements, reminiscent of Imperial combat algorithms he'd once interfaced with. "I've seen patrol patterns like this," he said suddenly, reaching into the hologram to trace a particular flow. "In the Empire's automated defense networks. They're not random, they're coordinated." The room went quiet. "You saying these pirates have Imperial tech?" Scott asked. "No," Holden shook his head. "This is different. More elegant. Like someone took the basic principles and evolved them into something new. Something better." "That's not comforting," Lay said. "Doesn't change anything," Rawlins cut in. "New Haven needs that vaccine. Question is, are we taking the contract or we abandoning the project? Sorry for the complications." "Stay skeptical, Mr. Rawlins." One by one, the crew nodded. They all knew the risks of cloud running, and they all knew what it meant to be the only hope for a colony in trouble. "Requisition whatever you need," Rawlins told Holden. "We launch in 48 hours." As the crew dispersed to their preparations, Holden lingered in the mess, studying the charts. A large man settled into the seat beside him, Brady, the bartender from the station, his 6 eyes blinking in their hypnotic sequence. "Heard you're heading into the drift," Brady said, setting down 2 glasses of his phosphorescent liquor. "First deep cloud run?" "Second." Holden nodded, accepting the drink. "Any advice?" "Just the usual warning," Brady smiled, all 6 eyes twinkling. "There be pirates, but—" He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Remember what I said about nowhere, about how this place isn't supposed to exist? What about it? The drift? That's nowhere's nowhere. Things that disappear from here, that's where they go. Some of them come back, different." Brady stood, his expression unreadable. "Watch your crew's backs out there. And remember, in the deep cloud, everything's hunting something." After Brady left, Holden sat alone in the mess, watching the holographic cloud swirl and thinking about nowhere's nowhere, about hunting and being hunted, and about the fine line between running from something and running toward it. In 48 hours, they'd cross that line. He just hoped they'd all be alive to come back. I've used this chapter to introduce the rest of the crew while setting up the dangerous mission ahead. We've also started layering in more mystery about the cloud itself and the nature of the pirates they'll be facing. Would you like me to continue with Part 4, where they venture into the drift? Of course, but the drift swallowed sensor readings like a black hole swallowed light. Holden watched from the Falcon Heavy security station as another scan disappeared into the swirling chaos ahead, returning nothing but ghostly echoes and quantum static. "How do you navigate through this?" he asked Mackenzie, who sat at the pilot's station with an almost zen-like calm. "You don't navigate the drift," she replied, her hands dancing across manual controls. "You feel it, like reading a river's current." She nodded toward the view screen, where colors shifted in patterns that hurt his eyes. "Watch the flow long enough, you start to see the paths." 6 hours into the deep cloud, and Holden was starting to understand why Imperial ships avoided this region. His neural implants were picking up data that made no sense, quantum signatures that seemed to move backward through time, radiation patterns that followed mathematical sequences that shouldn't exist in nature. "Getting some weird readings from the port sensor array," Scott called from engineering. "Like something's tasting our signals." "Shut it down," Rollins ordered from the captain's chair. "Passive sensors only from here on. Mackenzie?" "Got a gut feeling about this channel," she said, adjusting their course slightly. "Feels right," the bot said. Holden was about to ask what she meant when his tactical display lit up with warnings. "Multiple contacts emerging from." Inside the cloud structure itself, the pirates appeared like ghosts materializing from the ether, sleek ships with profiles he didn't recognize, moving with an artificial precision that confirmed his earlier suspicions about their control systems. 7 ships, he reported, his military training kicking in. 3 heavy, 4 light. They're running some kind of coordinated tactical system I've never seen before. Their formation. Rollins leaned forward, studying the display. "It's hurting us." "Away from the trade routes," Mackenzie confirmed. "They're pushing us deeper in." The first shots came as brilliant lances of energy that seemed to bend reality around them. The Falcon Heavy shuddered as Scott diverted power to their shields. "Those aren't Imperial weapons," Holden said, fingers flying over his console as he coordinated their point defense systems. "The energy signature is all wrong. It's like they're shooting holes in space itself." "Jonay, get those cargo bay defense turrets online," Rollins barked. "Isabella, prep the med bay. This is going to get rough." Yeah." Mackenzie's piloting was incredible. She seemed to anticipate the pirates' movements before they happened, threading the Falcon Heavy through gaps in their formation that closed like teeth behind them. But Holden could see the pattern forming. They were being led somewhere specific. "If this plan works, Chris." "Captain," he called out, "their attack pattern, it's not random. They're pushing us toward that debris field at bearing 3-4 Mark 7. Rollins' expression changed from concern to something else, a grim satisfaction that Holden hadn't seen before. "Good. That's exactly where we need to be." "So, Mackenzie, you thinking what I'm thinking?" The pilot grinned. "The graveyard? It's crazy. But yeah, we might just make it." Another volley rocked the ship. "Hull breach on deck 3, Lay reported. "Emergency seals holding." "What's the graveyard?" Holden demanded, redirecting power to their aft shields. "It's where ships go to die," Rollins said, "but also where some of them learn to live again." "Scott, I need everything you can give the engines. We're going to thread the needle." The debris field loomed ahead, a massive collection of derelict ships and scattered wreckage that seemed to go on forever. But as they drew closer, Holden noticed something odd about its structure. "Those aren't random debris patterns," he said. "They're organized, like cells in a living thing." "Now you're getting it," Mackenzie said, her hands steady on the controls. "The graveyard remembers, and it protects its own. The pirates fired again, but their shots seemed to curve away from their targets, drawn to the twisted metal shapes ahead. As they entered the field, Holden's tactical displays went crazy, showing impossible readings and phantom signatures. "Multiple contacts," he shouted. "No, hundreds of contacts, but that's impossible." Through the view screen he saw it, ghost images of ships moving through the debris, some ancient, some so advanced they hurt to look at, and among them, a massive structure that seemed to fold through dimensions his mind couldn't quite process. The planet. The planet. The planet. The planet. The pirate ships pulled back, their formation breaking apart as their coordinated systems failed. Whatever lived in the graveyard, it didn't welcome them. "What is this place?" Holden whispered. "Nobody knows," Rollins said quietly. "But some say it's where the first inhabitants of the cloud left their mark. A reminder that everything we think we know about space, about reality itself," he gestured at the impossible sight before them, "is just the surface of something much deeper." "Horse laid in through the safe passage," Mackenzie reported. "We'll be through in 20 minutes. The pirates won't follow us here." Holden watched the ghost ships dance around them, their patterns both beautiful and terrifying. His imperial training had taught him that space was something to be conquered, controlled, understood. But here in the deep cloud, in this graveyard of ships that refused to die, he was learning a different truth. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. Some places weren't meant to be controlled. And sometimes the best way to survive was to accept that you weren't meant to understand everything you saw. As the Falcon Heavy wound its way through the graveyard's protective embrace, Holden thought about Brady's words back at Redford 1, about nowhere's nowhere, and about things that came back different. He was starting to understand what the bartender meant. New Haven wasn't what Holden expected. After their passage through the graveyard, he'd almost expected another cobbled-together station like Redford 1. Instead, they found a colony built into a massive asteroid, its surface dotted with environmental domes that gleamed like soap bubbles in the cloud's ethereal light. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Isabella said as they supervised the unloading of the vaccine. "Hard to believe they carved all this out of solid rock in less than a decade." "Necessity," a colony official named Gilbert explained, checking the vaccine's containment seals. "When the fever hit, we had to expand medical facilities fast. Started digging, and, well," she gestured to the vast chamber around them, "turned out the asteroid was mostly hollow, and not naturally so." Holden's enhanced senses picked up the distinctive geometrical patterns in the chamber walls, too perfect to be natural, too alien to be human. "You found something here." "We found lots of things," Gilbert said carefully, "but that's not why you came." She handed Rollins a data crystal. "Your payment, plus the docking privileges we promised. And," she hesitated, "there's a bonus for making it through the graveyard. Not many ships can do that." "The graveyard chose to let us pass," Rollins corrected. "We just accepted the invitation." After the colony officials left, Holden walked the curved corridors of the medical center, watching as medical teams rushed to distribute the vaccine. His Imperial combat implants were still giving him strange readings, suggesting that parts of the asteroid's interior weren't so much hollow as absent. Spaces that existed in the scan results but somehow didn't register as physical locations. "Picking up the anomalies, aren't you?" Scott appeared beside him, his cybernetic eye whirring. "Same thing happened when I first came here, like there's more to this place than we can see." "You've been here before?" "Supply runs, mostly. But each time," the engineer shrugged, "it's like the place shows you something new. Something it thinks you're ready to see." Malk held up the rum. They made their way to an observation dome where the rest of the crew had gathered. Through the transparent panels, the cloud put on a display that made the aurora borealis look tame by comparison. Colors shifted and flowed, forming patterns that seemed almost meaningful, like a language written in light. "The pirates never come here," Mackenzie said, her fingers tracing patterns on the dome's surface that matched the flows outside. "Some say it's because of what the colonists found in the asteroid. Others think it's the cloud itself, that it protects places where people are trying to build something real." "And what do you think?" Holden asked. "I think," she smiled, "that some questions are better left as questions." The doctor's face became anxiously gray. My dear," Rollins joined them, his weathered face reflecting the cloud's colors. "Ship's restocked. We can head back to Redford 1 whenever you're ready." He paused. "Unless you're planning to stay." Holden looked at him sharply. "Sir, New Haven's always looking for security personnel, especially ones with your training. Could set up a new life here, far from any imperial entanglements." Ramsey put his order card in the pocket of the coat. Yes, the offer was tempting. New Haven was exactly the kind of place the Empire would never find him. A colony that officially didn't exist in a region of space that defied imperial navigation. He could disappear here completely. But as he watched the crew members Mackenzie plotting their return course on a portable display, the Zhang twins arguing good-naturedly about power distribution, Scott and Isabella discussing some modification to the medbay's systems, he realized something. "Thank you, sir," he said, "but I think I'm already home." Rollins nodded, as if he'd expected nothing else. "Good, because I wasn't looking forward to breaking in another security officer." He gestured toward a particular flow pattern in the cloud. "Beautiful, isn't it? Reminds me of an old Earth aurora. You seen one?" "No," Rollins smiled. "But out here, in the cloud, sometimes I think we're seeing what auroras dream of becoming." They left New Haven the next day, the colony's domes shrinking behind them until they were just more lights in the endless dance of the cloud. Their path back would take them near the graveyard again, but Holden wasn't worried. He understood now what Brady had meant about things coming back different. The Empire had trained him to see space as a battlefield, as territory to be conquered. But the cloud was teaching him to see it as something else, as mystery and wonder and possibility, all wrapped up in swirling colors and quantum mathematics that shouldn't work, but did anyway. Whether to live or die. Standing on the Falcon Heavy's observation deck, watching the impossible colors swirl outside, Holden thought about all the paths that had led him here, about desperate choices and lucky accidents, about pirates and graveyards and colonies built in hollow asteroids. The Empire would call this nowhere, would mark it on their charts as a place to avoid, a navigation hazard to be feared. But Holden knew better now. This wasn't nowhere. This was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Hey, rookie," Mackenzie's voice came over the comm. "Got some interesting readings up ahead. Want to come help me figure out if we've found another mystery?" Holden smiled. In the cloud, there was always another mystery, and he had all the time in the world to explore them. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it a lot. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. Feel free to comment and share this story too. It helps the channel grow. Let's make this channel huge together.